Sometimes the messenger cannot be a person from the outside. The person who is the face of a solution needs to be someone who deeply understands the community's lived experience. No matter how well-intentioned or informed, not having the same cultural experience or perspective truly limits how well a person can communicate an idea.
Outsiders sometimes walk into situations with the idea that they know better. They have an idea that the people who live there simply have to accept. But the most successful solutions are usually those driven by the very people who live there.
Culture matters. We cannot build trust without first understanding and respecting the culture. Melinda French Gates is a philanthropist, businesswoman, and global advocate for women and girls. As co-chair of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, she helps to set the organization's overall direction. Through her work at the foundation over more than 2 decades, she has seen firsthand that empowering women and girls can bring about transformational improvements in the health and prosperity of families, communities, and societies. Her work has led her to increasingly focus on gender equity as a path to meaningful change across the globe.
Thank you so much, Melinda, for joining us. I know you spent many years overseeing public health in the field in a very up-close and personal way. Can you please share an example of seeing the concept of culture play out?
One of the things Hans Rosling, he spent a lot of time in Mozambique, he and his wife working in global health. And one of the things that he learned was that you had to listen to local culture. So there were all these taboos and all these reasons people wouldn't come into the health clinic, let's say, for instance, to deliver a baby. And you wouldn't know what all of them are, but you might keep working with the locals to try and bring women in. And finally, a woman came in the throes of delivery, and she was clearly not going to make it. And Hans felt terrible, but he delivered this baby that was not alive when it came. And he felt awful. And the woman also lost her life. And he just felt completely awful about what had happened. So he turned to a nun who was in the area, and she said to him, "You know what you have to do?" And he said, "No." And she said, "You have to send the bodies back to the community and back in clothing, and they will respect you as a doctor because you know how important it is for them to bury this baby and their wife." And so when he went out to this village many years later, he was so surprised. He'd sent the baby back and the mom back wrapped in a cloth, a beautiful cloth, in the ambulance. And when he went out to this village years later, he was really shameful, and he was afraid to go in this village. And when he got to the village, everybody was clapping for him. They said, "We all know who you are." And he said, "Yes, but I lost the mom and the baby's life of this, local beloved villager." And they said, "No, but you respected us and our culture, and you did your best, and you sent her back to us." And what Hans learned from that was the importance of cultural context. Women would have never, ever come back to that health clinic if he hadn't done what he'd done. And he only did it because he listened to a nun who knew that local culture and setting. And it's a lesson he carried throughout his life and taught many others, including me.
Wow. Thank you, Melinda. Hans Rosling really sought to understand the local culture in Mozambique. This understanding led to empathy, respect, appreciation, and the ability to honor a person and their culture, not just in healing, but even in death. Great example. Thank you again. Empathy and respect are key. We also need to understand culture to know how we might solve a problem and how the people who live there might solve it. Understanding culture is essential to be able to work successfully with local people and do so with their permission.
I'm now hopping on with another champion of public health, Dr. Helene Gayle. For almost a decade, Dr. Gayle was president and CEO of CARE, a leading international humanitarian organization. An expert on global development, humanitarian, and health issues, she spent 20 years with the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, working primarily on HIV/AIDS. She worked at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, directing programs on HIV/AIDS and other global health issues.
Hello, Dr. Gayle.
Hello, Zainab.
We're talking about culture, Dr. Gale. I know you have a vast experience with respecting culture and how much culture matters, especially in your time at CARE. Can you describe how you were actually changing culture with CARE as you were giving women more power?
Well, CARE is a global organization focused on eradicating extreme poverty around the world. And we work with some of the poorest countries around the world, focusing on what's the most effective ways in which we can decrease poverty and hopefully do it in a sustainable way. Well, in doing that, we recognized that a focus on girls and women was hugely important for a couple of reasons. First of all, girls and women are disproportionately impacted by poverty around the world. So if you just go where the numbers are greatest, you would put your focus there. But we also realized that if you focus on girls and women, you have probably the greatest return on your investment. If you invest in a girl's education, she is more likely to get married later, have an income, have fewer children, use that income to educate her children, and you really start a virtuous cycle that has an impact not only on that girl, but on her community, her family, and ultimately on her nation. So we really said that investing in girls and women was the most powerful way to really have an impact on global poverty. But that did mean shifting cultures and changing norms and changing the way women and girls are valued in societies where they often are not highly valued.
That's so brilliantly simple.
Well, I think you can't change cultures unless you respect them, because ultimately cultures evolved for a reason. And that meant, of course, not only working with girls and women, but also working with men and boys, because you can't really focus on how we change girls and women without also thinking about how do we change the way boys and men think about themselves in relationship to their daughters, their mothers, their sisters. So, it means changing whole societies. It's often thought that if women brought incomes home, that husbands would be jealous. In fact, we found oftentimes just the opposite, because once women were seen as bringing value to their families, they were actually respected in ways that they had not been before. One of the things that's so gratifying about seeing women's lives changed and girls' lives change is that it had a real ripple effect within communities. So if you change a girl's life, she's more likely to be able to change the life of her family and then her family's family and on and on. And so we realized when you can invest in girls and women, because ultimately you change a girl, you change a family, you change a community, you change a nation.
In so many ways in your work, you are helping build and strengthen these relationships, helping develop and grow the culture.
Thank you, Zainab.